So we're going to do the autonomic nervous system today. And basically your book just focuses primarily on motor signals down through the autonomic nervous system. It seems really complex, but it's really not that bad. So let me flip to the PowerPoint and I'll kind of talk you guys through it. We'll probably finish the whole chapter. I had it kind of bleeding over into next week, but I think we'll probably get it done because it's not a very long chapter, really. All right. Okay, first of all, when we're talking on our autonomic nervous system, we're going to look at two big branches of it. And our two big branches that we're going to look at is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So what does sympathetic do? You guys remember? I know we talked about a little bit in my 201 class. It wasn't a big focus though. Anybody know? Yeah, it's like your adrenaline rush. So what happens when we get a big adrenaline rush? Heart rate increases. So we have increased heart rate. What else? That's it. When you get do you breathe any faster? Yes. It's not as prominent. So, okay, so increased respiration rate. You said dilation of the eyes. Why would we see dilation of our eyes? So remember, sympathetic is like an adrenaline rush. We call it our fight or flight, which means we have to be able to run away really fast or turn and fight to basically save ourselves. So why would our eyes dilate, get larger when we're in this situation? Yeah, focus, bring more light in so we can see things and process things more quickly. So we're going to see dilated eyes. Why would heart rate increase? What is your heart doing? It's pumping more blood. And what does our blood carry? Oxygen and glucose. What do we, no, that's not all, but those are the big things we're going to talk about. What do we need oxygen and glucose for in this situation? Who's really working hard in these situations? Energy, exactly right. Our muscles, right? We're going to dump everything to our muscles. To make ATP, we need oxygen and we need glucose, right? So heart rate and respiration ramp up why? To give us more oxygen. If we don't already have glucose in our body, who can we go get glucose from? Where do we store glucose? Not in fat cells. That's fat. Yeah, close. Glycogen. Glycogen. Where do we store glycogen? In the liver and in the muscles. So if we don't have enough glucose in our blood, can we go get it? Yeah, we go get it from the liver. We say, hey, liver, convert that back to glucose, dump it into our blood. We're circulating faster. Now our muscles have this super plentiful supply of oxygen and glucose. So we have lots of ATP so we can run away from the boogeyman or turn and fight the boogeyman. All right, in a fight or flight situation, who do we not need to be working in the body right now? Pretty much everything else, but let's list them. Do we need to digest our lunch when we're running away? So we don't need digestion. Do we need to stop and go potty? No, so we don't need our urinary system. How about stop and reproduce? No, we'll probably be toast if we do, right? Reproductive system. So these are the big systems that when these guys ramp up, we're going to ramp these guys down because we don't need them right now. So we're not going to shut them off to the point they get nothing because they would die, but we're going to shut them down to the most minimal amount. This over here is our sympathetic system. I always say you can remember it because think of having sympathy for a really stressful situation, and that causes you heart rate and all that stuff to happen in a stressful situation. This side over here we call our parasympathetic. And we also call it, we call this the fight or flight. We call this the rest and digest. So once we're not running away from the boogeyman and we're having a normal life, everything goes back to normal, what's going to happen to your body over here? If we're not under stress, what's going to happen over here? So over here, if we're on a parasympathetic side, we're going to see decreased heart rate, decreased respiration rate, decreased dilation of the eyes, right? We're going to stop dumping glycogen into the bloodstream because we may or may not need it, but we can go eat now. So these things are going to kind of calm back down, these things from over here. So we call they get inhibited. We see an inhibitory response. When we ramped them up, we called it an excitatory response. So now these guys go into more of an inhibitory response, and these guys are going to ramp up. So these guys, they don't really get too excited, but it's more of an excitatory response where we're, okay, everything's fine. Let's go ahead and digest our lunch now. When we're doing this, these guys get inhibited, so they can have an inhibitory response. So basically, when we're looking at this system, we look at one side and say, how do we send a signal to either go up or go down? Because when this goes up, this goes down in fight or flight, right? And when we're in rest and digest, this goes down and this goes up. So we have some amount of our systems that may be getting ramped up at the same time another one's getting shut down, and vice versa. And so what we're basically going to be looking at with our autonomic nervous system on the motor side of it is, how do we send the signal to these guys to either excite them or to calm them back down? So, and then we also are going to see memories tied into this that we'll kind of do at the very bottom. All right, so this is our visceral motor system. What does that mean? We're sending signals into those internal organs to do something. And you guys remember we had sensor, and then we had processing, right? Central nervous system, and then effector. So we're going to be looking at effectors. What's an effector? It's a guy doing the action, doing the work, right? So we're going to be looking at, how do we send a motor signal down to an effector, somebody who's going to react or respond to that signal. So that's what we're going to be looking at. All right, what are the things that get coordinated? All these things we just kind of talked about: digestive system, urinary system, reproductive system, cardiovascular systems, even eyes, things like that. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll kind of go into some of our higher order functions. A lot of it's memory processing, short-term memory versus long-term memory. So that's where we're headed with this. We looked at the somatic nervous system. We mapped the somatic sensory up. We did not map the somatic motor down, but we looked at it. And then we looked a little bit at some of the details, not super detailed. So now we're going to look at that somatic motor. Okay, one important thing to note, our hypothalamus is kind of, it's our integrative system. Or center. What does that mean? We're going to route some of our stuff through our hypothalamus. So we are going to have upper neurons and we're going to have lower neurons. Do you guys remember that we had that in the somatic nervous system? So on the motor side, we talked about the upper neuron and the lower motor neuron. So we're going to see that. Let me take this off. All right, but what we're going to see, instead of synapsing in the spinal cord, so do you remember how we came down and we went to our little map on the spinal cord and we did a synapse? With the upper motor neurons on the autonomic system, they come down, they route through the elevator, but the axon doesn't end in synapse at the elevator. What it does is it goes outside of the spinal cord and it synapses on something called a ganglia. Do you guys remember what a ganglia is? We talked about the dorsal root ganglia. What was a ganglia? Yeah,
is it a group of axons?
Yes, that's exactly right. Cluster of nerve cells. You just scared everybody. We thought a ghost was in here. But I'm glad you're participating. So it's a cluster of nerve cells. So when we look at our visceral motor system, our upper motor neuron goes from, this is important, I might ask a test question about this. It's going to go from central nervous system all the way out to the peripheral nervous system. This is our visceral motor, our upper motor neuron. Okay, how did we define central nervous system? Brain and spinal cord. So that means our upper motor neuron comes all the way down and it leaves the spinal cord. And then it synapses on the ganglia. And then we're going to look here at where the heck are all these ganglia. All right, so a couple terms you need to know. Preganglionic neuron. We just defined ganglia as a cluster of cells, right? So preganglionic neuron basically means the neuron that's coming down to the ganglia where the synapse point is. That's our preganglionic neuron. And then we're going to have a postganglionic one. What does that mean? The neuron leaving after the synapse point in the ganglia, right? So everybody comfortable with preganglionic, postganglionic? Okay. So we're going to look at these in, more detail. All right, so this is just showing a little bit of a comparison between our somatic and our autonomic. You can see they're kind of originating up here on our cerebral cortex. For our skeletal muscles, we routed down and went to some of these skeletal muscles. For this one, we're going to go down here, and then here's that was our somatic, which we're pretty familiar with, hopefully. Now we're going to look here at our autonomic. What we see here is we have these ganglia this is going to be our synapse point out here on our ganglia. Okay, sympathetic, we said fight or flight. You guys all know the types of things that happens because I'm going to ask you about it. With sympathetic, we see increased heart rate, increased respiration, dilation of vessels, increased alertness. We definitely want to be awake, right? Increased metabolic activity. Why? Because we're dumping everything to our muscles. So our muscles get max stuff they need for that fight or flight. And then for our parasympathetic system, we're going to rest and digest. We're going to conserve. We're going to stay at a resting metabolic rate. They are, you guys probably already figured out, the opposition of each other. So what you're going to see when we start looking at this is sometimes it's kind of either a parasympathetic type signal going through or a parasympathetic signal going through. Sometimes we're doing a little bit of both signals. Why would we see dual innervation, both parasympathetic and sympathetic going to an area? Sometimes we have what we call resting tone. You guys probably remember that from skeletal muscles, like postural muscles always have some amount of excitatory stuff coming, which causes those muscles to contract just so we can maintain our posture. You see that same kind of thing with some of these systems here. And so we may say, okay, this is our normal digestion peristalsis rate. You guys know what peristalsis is, right? It's the automatic contractions of your smooth muscles. Well, if I'm doing fight or flight, so I may have some excitatory signals coming in saying, hey, push your food through at this rate. But now all of a sudden I'm doing a sympathetic thing. I may have that signal that usually is keeping that moving, saying, okay, we need to inhibit you right now. So you get signals coming through maybe at the same time to kind of fine tune things that have constant signals coming into them. All right, we talked about all of this. I don't think we missed anything. Oh, I didn't talk about activation of sweat glands. Why would our sweat glands get more active? When we're stressed, we get sweaty and hot, right? What causes heat? Well, what do the sweat glands do? Yeah, they're, well, it's going to be, some of it's going to be heat. Where does heat come from? Increased heart rate participates in that. Who's our number one heat producers in the body? Skeletal muscles. And why are they producing heat? Because they're using tremendous amounts of ATP, right? It's that ATP conversion that creates a lot of heat. So if we are fight or flighting and we're really ramping up our metabolic function, we're going to get hot, right? So our sweat glands are going to kick into gear. All right, I think everything else on here we talked about. Okay, and this is our parasympathetic. It basically does about the opposite of all these. Okay, with our sympathetic division, we have something called the thoracolumnar division, and it's basically exactly what it sounds like. It's in this middle section of your spinal cord. So the sympathetic system gets to own the middle of your spinal cord. Parasympathetic system owns the top of your spinal cord and the bottom of your spinal cord. It doesn't get to own the middle part to it. And we're going to look at how does that mean we don't give any signals on the autonomic nervous system on the parasympathetic side to the abdomen, do we? Yeah. So we have to get those signals a different way in there. So we'll look at that. Okay, so our preganglionic neurons, this is for our sympathetic side, our fight or flight side, is from T1 to L2. What's above T1? Cervical. What's below L? Well, how many L's do we have? 5. So, and we're ending at L2, which means we have L3, 4, 5, and all of my sacral nerves, right? So parasympathetic owns up here and down here, and sympathetic just owns that center area. Preganglionic neurons are short. This is super important that you know this. Postganglionic neurons are going to be very long. All right, what does that mean? Preganglionic, what did we define it as? Yeah, before we synapse at my little cluster of cells, right? So my preganglionic comes from my brain down to the synapse point, which is my ganglia. That is my preganglionic one. We say it's short. Why do we say it's short? It barely goes outside of the spinal cord before our synapse point. And then it's a lot, the second, the postganglionic neuron, from the synapse point out to your effectors is very long. That's important in the sympathetic system. And the reason why is by traveling quickly to here, we can send that signal to a whole lot of postganglionic neurons simultaneously because we've shortened the time to here. So if you guys ever watch Crash Course, where he talks so fast all the time? He had a great analogy on this I heard years ago, and I thought, oh, I'm stealing that because to me it makes the most amount of sense. But he always talks, or somehow he talks, I can't remember exactly how he words it, but by having that short one, it's like a megaphone. When he gets here, it's going to blast it like a megaphone to a whole bunch of stuff. If we're fight or flighting, do you want to tell a whole bunch of stuff all at the same time, really loud and really clear? Hey, run away. Yeah, so it's short, so we can kind of magnify the signal. Remember, we're sympathetic side, so this is my fight or flight. I can send that signal to a whole bunch of systems all at one time. And then I have long ganglionic ones going out to the effectors. All right, so that's really important to know because that is different when we get into the parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is going to have a really long ganglionic neuron and a short post-ganglionic neuron. Liken it to a private conversation. If I'm not rest and digest, am I in a panic and a hurry? Do I need to bullhorn the information to everybody? No, I can kind of go over to the stomach and say, hey, stomach, go ahead and start working now. So it has that really long one because then I can have a shorter post one and you can have kind of more private conversations with these guys because we're not in a crisis situation. So sympathetic, short preganglionic, long postganglionic. And at that short synapse point, we can talk to a whole bunch of post neurons at the same time. All right, so our cell bodies are in the lateral horns. We know that's right because we saw visceral motor came down through the lateral horns. Whoops. Oh my gosh. I don't know what I did here. Sorry about that. And then the axons are going to enter the anterior root, right? They're going to come in visceral sensory, jump in the anterior root. Why? What is the anterior root? Motor, right? It's movement. So we come down, the difference is we're not going to synapse, we're going to, well, we hit the cell bodies and then we take the axons out to those areas, to our ganglia. All right, and then our ganglionic neurons are near the spinal cord. Okay, so let's look at this. Here is a picture of our sympathetic division. And remember I said T1 to L2 gets owned by the sympathetic division. And then up here is going to be my parasympathetic. Down in here is going to be my sympathetic. All right, so the ganglia, my signal is going to come down and we're going to look at these ganglia. These are my little clusters of cell bodies. They are outside of the spinal cord and they're in different locations and they're transmitting different types of signals in here. These particular ones on the side are called chain ganglia, which is because they look like a big chain kind of spiraling down there. So if I had a signal come down and it went out and it synapsed at this ganglia, it could synapse at this ganglia, and then it could send the signal out to these various organs. The other thing, the advantage to the chain is if I have a signal come in, it can transfer up because you can see up here, we said we dilate our eyes, right? But this goes down to T1. Are the eyes connected to T1? No. So what the chain does is it allows us, remember how I said we can talk to a whole bunch of stuff at one time? We can relay that signal up the chain to the effector it needs to go to or down the chain. And we can send some up and some down and some out. So a whole bunch of guys get the signal at the same time. So they'll travel through these chain ganglia and they can affect all these things. What do you need to know when you look at this? And I'm going to talk about these here in just a minute, is some of these big divisions here, like we have our celiac ganglia, our superior mesenteric ganglia, lesser splenic, and our lumbar. You should know those branches of nerves. Just know those big bundle names. They are named actually for vessels that are really close, and you guys are just about to start this coming up in lab, so I will talk about this really quick. If we had our little guy here, and here's our diaphragm. Oh, I'm gonna make it higher so I have room to draw. Okay, here's his diaphragm. Here's my heart. And my descending abdominal or aorta comes down like this, and then it makes a Y, and it goes to each of my femurs. As soon as I come through the diaphragm, this very first branch off of my descending abdominal aorta is called the superior mesenteric. Do you guys know what the mesenteries are? Sometimes I think it helps if you know what they're named for. The mesenteries are, if you look at your intestines make a tube like this, kind of, but they're hooked to each other like this. And that kind of holds them from twisting, knotting, coming unraveled. And this has tremendous blood supply into the mesenteries, which is also how we absorb nutrients through those blood supply. Well, these tissues that hold those intestines together are called the mesenteries. And so if I'm using the term mesenteries, I'm going to be talking about digestive stuff, right? I'm going to be talking about, and then our large intestines have the same thing. Our large intestines kind of go around our small intestines like this. So when we look at this naming scheme, it's kind of named for those arteries or those blood vessels, but it's also going to be innervating or sending neural signals to this same type of stuff. So this first one's the superior mesenteric. And it goes to the stomach, out to the stomach and stuff, and becomes the celiac. So you can see that right here. Do you see I have the celiac ganglia? Anybody have celiac disease? Well, I won't ask you that, but have you heard of celiac disease, which is like a gluten intolerance that affects your stomach? Think of that. So this is going to go, as you go over here, do you see how it innervates stomach, liver, those digestive things? So I think that helps with the naming scheme a little bit. So superior mesenteric is going to go to those intestines, It's going to go through the celiac ganglia to the stomach. Our lesser splenic sounds like spleen. And your spleen is right over here on this side. It is the second, one of the second branches off the aorta because the splenic artery is. So your splenic nerve goes over to all of those areas over there. And then we get into our inferior mesenteric. What is mesenteries? What do they go with? These guys. So now we're going to be talking to the lower part of the digestive stuff. All right, and then you can see some of these can go down into the sacral area because if I'm fight or flighting, do I need to give signals to these guys down here? Well, I do, but I'm telling them to calm down, right? Shut down, calm down. We don't need you right now. So these guys are going to be getting inhibitory signals, shut down, relax, don't do anything right now, take a break. And who are going to be exciting? Things like this, the heart, the lungs, the eyeballs. Are we going to ramp up our salivary glands in fight or flight? No, so we're going to be sending a signal, hey, we don't really need you right now. So anyway, we're going to be sending signals, either excitatory, ramping them up, or inhibitory, calming them down, and they're going through here, and they're going to travel up these ganglia. There's other ones that aren't pictured here, and I'll talk about those in a second. All right, so sympathetic chain ganglia. The chain ganglia are on the sides of that's the ones we could see here. So this is my chain ganglia, and they're pretty close to the spinal cord. They're just on the lateral sides of the spinal cord. And again, it's just how nerves travel up and down, so we can talk to stuff quickly. Let's see. The three types of sympathetic ganglia. We have our sympathetic chain ganglia, which we just looked at. We have collateral ganglia. And your collateral ganglia, I always find it interesting they named it collateral because they're really kind of out in front of the spinal cord a little bit. And they're usually, when you're real young, they're a pair of ganglia. And as you mature, they kind of fuse and it ends up kind of being a single ganglia. But they're named for when you're young, so they call them collateral. But like I said, they come and they fuse together. And they're actually kind of out here more ventral than lateral. And then we have our adrenal medulla. Our adrenal medulla is our adrenal gland. Where's your adrenal gland sit? You guys remember? Nobody knows. It sits right on top of your kidneys. So my kidneys would be in my retroperitoneal, or the back of my body, and they're going to look like this. The adrenal gland is like a little triangle hat right on top of your kidney. So you have two adrenal glands, one on each kidney like this. The inner medulla, so your adrenal gland, and we're going to start this actually just next week. You have an adrenal cortex, which is the outer edge, and then you have an adrenal medulla. And your medulla secretes your adrenaline, which is epinephrine. You guys have probably heard that, right? Epinephrine or norepinephrine. So those are the two hormones that get secreted from the adrenal medulla. So if we're having a fight or a flight response, do we want epinephrine? Yeah, absolutely. So we also have a ganglia that goes directly down to these adrenal medulla and causes hormones to be secreted. Okay, our sympathetic chain ganglia, again, they're on both sides. We saw those going up and down. That was the one we had the best picture of. What's it controlling? The body wall, the thoracic cavity, the head, neck, and the limbs. And we saw that, let me backtrack, right here, right? We saw it come up to the head, areas of the head, salivary gland, eyes, some of this thoracic area. All right, this is a zoom in of our chain ganglia. So here's our spinal cord. Here will be our dorsal root ganglia. Here's our anterior root ganglia. We come out our spinal nerve right here, and this is where we have these two circles. We have this circle, and we talked about the rami, remember, but we didn't really go into too much detail, so we'll talk about this now. We have a white rami, let me try that again, a white ramus or a white rami, And we have a gray one. If it's white, what does that mean? What made neural stuff white? It's myelinated. And if it's myelinated, it moves fast, right? Myelination speeds signals up. If it's gray, what does that mean? Not myelinated. It's going to move slower. So how this works is, remember how we had to go up and down the chains? We could talk to a whole bunch of stuff at one time, or we could go up above where the thoracic starts and still do sympathetic stuff up here. How does it get to all those areas? It travels up this chain ganglia. So here's how it works. It comes in lateral horns right here, comes out my ventral root, and it's going to go into this little circular pattern right here. At this point, it either goes through the white ramus, which means it's going to be really fast moving, or it's going to go into the gray. If it's the gray, it means it can move a little bit slower. I mean, it's still like super fast, but compared to each other. If it goes in the gray rami, that means we're at the level that we're sending the signal to. And so it will just go around the gray rami, come out the spinal nerve, and go talk to whoever the effector is. If we are sending it up or down the chain, we are going to go into the white rami, and then we would go up the chain to the next ganglia, which if that's the level we needed to talk to, then we'd see it synapse and go out to that level. So let's say this was a salivary gland and this was the eye. If we go back to our picture real quick, you see how my eyes above my, oh, those are on the same ganglia. Let's do heart and eye. They're not on the same ganglia. Do you guys see that? Because heart's on this one, eyes on this one. So if I go back here, let's say this is the level of my heart. I'm saying, hey, it's fight or flight. We have to do something here. My heart rate's going to increase and my eyes are going to dilate. So here comes my signal that's like, oh my gosh, you guys get busy. My heart rate signal is going to go right out here to the heart. My eye signal is going to go up here, synapse, and go out and tell the eye to do its stuff. So we can send that signal up and down that chain and talk to a whole bunch of stuff at the same time. Does that help? And you can see we color coded our preganglionic, that's before our synapse in our ganglia, and our postganglionic. The pre is these red ones, post are the black ones on your little color key here. So if we're at that level, we would synapse at that ganglia, return to the spinal nerve. This is now my postganglionic neuron. If I'm going up, I don't synapse here. I keep on trucking up, and I'll synapse at the level I need to be at, and then go out that nerve. Collateral ganglia, like I said, they're anterior to the vertebral body. These are going to innervate abdominopelvic tissues and viscera. Your collateral ganglia, would be the front, so this would be my posterior view. You can see my posterior root ganglia. And these signals come in, they're still coming in my visceral, or I'm sorry, yeah, lateral horns, but visceral information, motor information. They go out the anterior root, they go down the white rami, but this time they're not synapsing yet, they're just gonna travel right through to the collateral ganglia. This is where we would synapse and then go to our visceral organs and abdominopelvic. So when we're naming these ganglia, we're just talking about that synapse point to the postganglionic neuron. Where is the postganglionic neuron going? To the effector, right? I didn't hear what you said, sorry. You good? All right, adrenal medulla, that's our third one. Again, it goes out to each adrenal gland. And these are totally behave differently. So we'll look at this. They release a neurotransmitter. That neurotransmitter, so what is a neurotransmitter? Where's it come from? What area of the body do we see neurotransmitters? Between nerves, right? That little synapse point, it goes across, and that chemical attaches to the post nerve, the postsynaptic neuron. And we see, you guys remember when we talk about depolarization and the postsynaptic neuron. So your neurotransmitter is just traveling from the axon of one neuron to the dendrite of another neuron, right? It's that little chemical that drifts across there. What is a hormone? So let's backtrack really quick. Is a neurotransmitter very long lasting? No, it goes away really fast, right? It drifts away, or we had, like in the case of skeletal muscles, we had that enzyme, acetylcholinesterase. You guys remember that? And it takes it away. So they don't last in those synaptic gaps very long. Now tell me about hormones. Where do hormones go? What is an endocrine secretion? It secretes from an island, right? From the pancreas, so an island of cells. It's ductless. You guys are like, oh my gosh, 201 was so long ago. And it secretes into the bloodstream. Are hormones long lasting as compared to neurotransmitters? Yes, they're very long lasting as compared to neurotransmitters. So what you're going to see with the adrenal medulla is we're going to secrete a neurotransmitter that is the exact same as the hormone, but it goes down to the adrenal gland and says, hey, we need this to last longer, so secrete it as a hormone, which is kind of interesting that it does that. So these neurotransmitters basically go to the adrenal medulla and say secrete the exact same thing as a hormone because it's longer lasting in the body. Okay, so this is how those work. They come out my visceral horns, go through my anterior root. They're going to go down here to through the ganglia, the adrenal ganglia, to the adrenal medulla, where look how short that postganglionic neuron. It is in the adrenal medulla, and it's telling this, hey, secrete some adrenaline, some epinephrine, and we can get things rolling here. So it really only goes to the adrenal gland, and it is only seen in that fight or flight response. Why? Because we need that epinephrine, that adrenaline. All right, so as we talked about, we have short preganglionic, long postganglionic, except for the adrenal medulla. We pretty much synapse in the adrenal medulla. What was the advantage to short preganglionic? That's the megaphone. We can tell a whole bunch of stuff all at once. Because if I hit that signal into my chain ganglia, boom, I can go all the way up down the chain, down the chain, and basically magnify that to everybody really quickly. So that is the advantage in the sympathetic, is we can send that signal, we can basically bullhorn it out and get a whole bunch of stuff to talk and move at the same time. All right, our sympathetic chain ganglia, we have 3 cervical, 10 to 12 thoracic, 4 to 5 lumbar, 4 to 5 sacral, and a coccygeal. I'm not going to ask you those numbers, so you don't have to worry about that. What you should know is T1 to L2. That is owned by the sympathetic system. And you should know white rami is myelinated, gray rami is unmyelinated. So your white is pretty fast moving because it's the one that sends them up and down the chain. Gray rami is going to go out to that level of the spinal cord. So we see our postganglionic fibers go out through the gray rami because we synapse at the level of the ganglia we want, and then we send it out to the effector at that level. Does that make sense? Everybody good? All right, so we kind of already talked about this. We enter the gray rami and we return to the spinal nerve. You guys remember how I kind of made a loop and then we just went right back out the spinal nerve? So gray rami is going to come around to that spinal nerve and then go out. What are we going to innervate? Some of the stuff we're going to see is sweat glands, erector pili, muscles, things like that. All right, in the cervical area, we're going to see those travel up and down, basically anything that gets innervated by 3, 7, 9, and 10 of our cranial nerves. Okay. And there's our picture again. So this, I'm not going to quiz you on like where I have a picture and you have to label all those things. But if I ask something like, what might be innervated by the superior mesenteric ganglia? You would know what? It's going to, yeah, upper digestion stop or inferior mesenteric. So just kind of know the naming schemes and it'll tell you what you need to know about it. Yes. The spleen has two big functions. The first function that the spleen does is, I always say it's like the graveyard for dead red blood cells. Red blood cells don't have a nuclei. They're made in bone marrow, and they're just little workhorses. Because they don't have a nuclei, they don't have DNA, they can't repair themselves, build proteins. The reason they're anucleated is it makes more room for hemoglobin, but they're just transporters. So but anyway, they only live about 3-ish weeks and then they wear out and they get damaged. When they get damaged, they can't be fixed. So we have to take them out of circulation. Some of the scarce commodities that you find in red blood cells is iron, which are the attachment points on our hemoglobin molecules. And we are always short of iron in our body. So when those areas that take them out of circulation, like the spleen, they break them down, recycled iron, and send it back to the bone marrow. So that's one thing the spleen does. The other thing is it is a site where we mature white blood cells in the spleen. So highly vascular because we're moving red blood cells and white blood cells in and out of the spleen, which is why oftentimes if somebody damages their spleen, it's so vascular, it's hard to stop the bleeding. You can live without it. Why? Because we mature white blood cells in other areas of the body as well. You might be a little more prone to illness. We also can break down red blood cells in other areas too. So you can totally live without your spleen, but that's kind of its two big jobs that it does. All right, so splenic nerve, we said. Oh, and I should have pointed out on your splenic nerve, this one does not pass through the chain ganglia. So if you look here on our splenic nerve, it doesn't have this ganglia out here, this additional ganglia out here. It just turns into the splenic nerve. All right, collateral ganglia we talked about. These are going to extend throughout the abdominal pelvic cavity. They all kind of do. I guess our chain ganglia go above and below. Your collateral are just in that abdominal pelvic. They're innervating tissues directly involved in the abdomen. So they're going to reduce blood flow and energy used to organs that aren't vital in fight or flight. So who's that going to be? These guys right here. So these are really going to be talking to your digestion system, your urinary system. They're reducing blood flow. Why? Because we don't need it when we're running away. All right, and I kind of walked you guys through this. Do you guys feel pretty good about when we looked at the picture of it, walking through it? All right, and I already talked about their names for those arteries. Celiac ganglia, that was kind of came off that superior mesenteric nerve and goes out, becomes the celiac. Some of our things were innervating stomach, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, spleen, all digestive organs. Again, superior mesenteric is near this superior mesenteric artery, so it's kind of that highest branch coming into my abdomen or my digestive area. It's going to do really the upper half of the small intestines and the upper part of the large intestine. So it's going to kind of do this part. Inferior mesenteric is going to do this part of these guys. And that's what we see, terminal ends of the large intestines. And then we're going to see urinary bladder, which is going to sit way down there low, sex organs, kidneys. And then our adrenal gland, again, I already jumped ahead to this. I said epinephrine, norepinephrine are what are secreted there. You'll also hear them called adrenaline and noradrenaline. One thing that we'll talk about as we get in, especially into lab next week, but also when we get to the endocrine system, and I'll actually talk about it a little bit today, is we think of epinephrine's excitatory, so we would assume kind of that norepinephrine's inhibitory. But at least for me, I was like, well, what the heck? Why are we secreting those guys out of the adrenal medulla at the same time? Really, norepinephrine is one of those hormones that can have an excitatory effect or an inhibitory effect. And what determines if it's going to ramp something up or if it's going to turn something down is the receptor. So here we have this chemical, norepinephrine, and it attaches to a receptor on an effector. So maybe a receptor on my intestines, and I'm fight or flight. Do I need my intestines? No, so my receptor may say shut down. So norepinephrine becomes inhibitory when it attaches to that particular type of receptor. But in another location in the body, norepinephrine may attach to a receptor that's like, get excited. So norepinephrine is one of those hormones that can be both an excitatory or an inhibitory hormone. What determines it? Who it attaches to actually decides if it's an excitatory or inhibitory. Your big excitatory one, though, is your epinephrine. It's 75 to 80% of your output from your medulla, the adrenal medulla, the middle part. You're going to see the cortex has all kinds of hormones too, but this is specific to the medulla of my adrenal gland. Okay, so the bloodstream is now going to carry neurotransmitters throughout the body, which it kind of turned into a hormone at that point, right? We went and we talked to the adrenal medulla and we said, release this as a hormone. So we will see both some of that epinephrine as a neurotransmitter. We will also see it as a hormone. So it's both. It's really unique in that it's both a neurotransmitter and a hormone. And we talked about why that is. Neurotransmitters are not very long lasting. They drift away. They get broken down by enzymes in the blood, enzymes at the synapse points. Hormones are going to last for a lot longer amount of time. So if we're having an adrenaline response, we don't want it to last for, 30 100ths of a second. We want it to have a little longer lasting effect than that. So by spitting this hormone out, we can prolong the effect. Okay, sympathetic activation, when's it gonna show up? When we have some sort of a crisis going, right? You see a near car accident or you get in a near car accident or something like that, that's gonna activate that sympathetic system. And we're gonna see entire body parts respond to that. And these are controlled by the hypothalamus. Remember when I told you it was their integration system for our sympathetic is the hypothalamus. All right, and we talked about, you guys all good with all of this? So we get more energy, blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up, respiration goes up, eyes dilate, muscles become kind of king at that moment. They never outdo the brain and the heart, but they get all the dump we can give muscles during that. Why? So we can fight or flight. All right, so this is important to know. So how do we stimulate those preganglionic neurons in our sympathetic system? What you need to know is our neurotransmitter that we're going to see kick into gear is acetylcholine. So it is from the preganglionic neuron, and it's acetylcholine. You guys heard this before. Where did we talk about acetylcholine before? Yeah, and when we talked about skeletal muscle contractions, right? It was the neurotransmitter that we use to make a muscle contract. So it's a really common neurotransmitter. It is always an excitatory neurotransmitter in the sympathetic system. So the first neuron comes down, secretes acetylcholine. At the ganglionic hormones, it's going to get that signal. It's going to relay that signal down to our effector. What's our effector? Yeah, the guy doing the moving, right? So that's going to cause depolarization, passing of that signal down to our effector, and it's going to release its neurotransmitter right into the effector, and it does it through things we call varicosities. I always think of like a leg on an octopus or something that kind of wraps around, has like all the little suction cups, although they're not suction cups, but they have almost like little bulbs that can all squirt out neurotransmitters. So if we had a skeletal muscle, you know how long skeletal muscles are, we can kind of talk to that whole skeletal muscle at one time. And those are called our varicosities. So here's an example. This is a smooth muscle, but here comes my preganglionic poston. Here's my ganglia. So this is my synapse point. From that second one, here comes my signal going down. It's going to talk to these smooth muscles. And here's where you can see those varicosities. Our axon kind of has all these little branches. This is what it looks like blown up with all these vesicles that once they get the signal, they're going to release their neurotransmitter out into the target membranes. These are norepinephrine. So our second neurotransmitter is norepinephrine. And we said norepinephrine can be excitatory or inhibitory, right? What decides that? Who it attaches to, right? So if we were sympathetic and we were talking to our digestive smooth muscles, this would have an inhibitory effect, right? If we were talking to our blood vessels, what do we do with our blood vessels when we have a sympathetic system? What happens to our blood vessels? They're going to get bigger, right? Because we're putting more oxygen, more glucose, all that stuff into it. So if these are coming down and talking to the smooth muscles in our blood vessels, it might be, well, it would still actually be inhibitory. Why? Because we're going to inhibit the muscle contraction so the vessels get larger. Yes. Yeah, well, like on the immediate side, I think shock, part of that is shock type symptoms. The other thing that we kind of talk about, probably not in as much detail as is interesting to a lot of people because it affects most people, is your body really can't distinguish between the types of stress. So you see a car accident, someone breaks into your house or something like that, you get that adrenaline response, which makes sense to us. We're like, that's perfect time to get an adrenaline response. But when you're stressed, like when you walked in for this test today, you also get an adrenaline response, even though it's really not worthy of the same adrenaline response as what you got when someone broke into your house, maybe. Your body cannot distinguish between the difference in those responses. And so what happens is we will build up negative adverse things to kind of that long-term stress that's not worthy of, like anxiety. I don't know, I'm a worrier. I worry about everything and anything. And so I feel like, you get under a lot of stress and you hear about cortisol, right? You guys have all heard the commercials about cortisol. That's kind of the adverse things that come from prolonged stress reactions because our body's not very good at distinguishing between if it's a stress worthy of a reaction or not. And obviously we don't get as strong of a reaction maybe, but you're still getting signals of stress coming in. Okay, so we release norepinephrine at the varicosities. Some of your ganglionic neurons receive acetylcholine. All right. Norepinephrine and epinephrine, we have alpha receptors and beta receptors. This is where I was talking about, it depends on the receptor on how that hormone, or I'm sorry, that neurotransmitter affects the effector. Some can be excitatory, some can be inhibitory. So norepinephrine stimulates alpha receptors to a higher degree than it does beta receptors. So you're going to see different excitatory degrees of excitatory or inhibitory responses. So alpha receptors are most commonly found in smooth muscle cells. It has an excitatory effect. What does that mean? It's going to ramp up contraction of smooth muscle cells. Alpha 2 ones are going to have more of an inhibitory effect. And sometimes, as I was talking about, some areas of your body where we have tone, where we have constant signals going to it to keep things moving, you will see during both these effects, we may talk to something to kind of inhibit one area, excite another area. All right, we find beta receptors on the membranes of cells in skeletal muscles, lungs, heart, liver. So beta 1 are going to do increased metabolic rate. Beta 2 are going to relax smooth muscles. Beta 3 are going to break down fat and turn it into triglycerides, and it's breaking down those, dumping them as energy reserves. All right, most sympathetic fibers release norepinephrine. So the first one's acetylcholine, second one's norepinephrine. And with these are some of them have acetylcholine. That's gonna be sweat glands, and I'm talking at the second, at the effector. Usually it's norepinephrine, but you may see a little bit of acetylcholine, nitrous oxide. These are not very common. Most of the time they're gonna be this norepinephrine. Okay, so really that's our sympathetic system. Do you guys feel pretty good about that? It's not too complex, right? I mean, it is, but it makes sense, hopefully. All right, let's look at parasympathetic. This is called the craniosacral. So parasympathetic owns this, and it owns this down here on my spinal cord. So we are going to see kind of cranial nerves, cervical nerves are going to go up here, really more cervical nerves, and then our S2, S4. This is going to be the opposite as far as distance goes. Remember, I was talking about when we're not in a fight or flight situation, we can go all the way to the effector or just outside the effector and say, hey, go ahead and start doing this, because it's not such a crisis situation. So we're going to see really long preganglionic neurons, short postganglionic neurons, and they're going to be in the target organ or just outside the target organ. So they're going to travel all the way out to whoever they are talking to. And this is, so here's my cranial area, my cranial cervical area, and the sacral area. Sympathetic owns all this. All right, so you will see, even though I don't get to own anything in the abdominal area, if I'm parasympathetic, I'm still talking to lots of stuff that's in the abdominal area, right? So somehow we have to get that signal down to that abdominal area. Here's our famous vagus nerve. Do you guys remember the vagus nerve from OOO, to touch and feel, when I gave you the cranial nerves? This guy right here, our cranial nerve, it goes all the way down here. That vagus nerve does. Super famous for its parasympathetic capabilities. It's a really long nerve. It's going to talk to heart, lungs, liver, stomach, pancreas, intestines, all of that stuff comes down through the vagus nerve. So where would we see this? This is going to ramp these guys up, slow these guys down. So it can have excitatory and inhibitory effects on, even though we're going all to the abdominal area, it might ramp up these digestive things, slow down heart rate and respiration rate. And then we can see these nerves come off here. I kind of mentioned those before. 3, 7, 9, and then 10, of course, is our vagus nerve. But we can also have signals come out from the sacral division, and they're going to talk to subclear down in the pelvic area. And this is all the preganglionic. All this red is the preganglionic, and there's going to be a ganglia on or near these guys. So these are really close to the area that I'm talking to. So a submandibular ganglia, remember how you have submandibular glands? It's right there by your glands, and it synapses out to your glands. All right, our terminal, the end of our last ganglia is going to be near the target organ. And then we have a go between our intramural ganglia. It's embedded in our target tissue. Here is on the parasympathetic side, you absolutely should know these guys, 3, 7, 9, and 10. 10, of course, is our super famous parasympathetic cranial nerve. 3 is oculomotor. What's oculomotor do? Eye movement, right? Facial nerve, it's going to innervate things, especially like the chewing stuff with digestion. Glossopharyngeal, it's going to be doing tongue, pharynx, swallowing, digestion kind of things. And then these guys are going to go all the way down into the abdomen. These upper ones, synapse, either in the ciliary, where have we heard this term before? We just did ciliary bodies in the eye, right? Terry, where do we hear this? Terry palatine. Where's that going? Remember pterygoid process? Where was that? Upper part of the mouth. Palatine is the palate of the mouth, right? So that's where these guys are going to be close. Submandibular is going to be lower jaw. And then otic, where's this one going? Otic is ears. So this is going to go out near the ears. Vagus nerve, as I mentioned, he does most of the work in the parasympathetic system. He's one of the cranial nerves, number 10, goes all the way down, talks to all that abdominal stuff. So he does 75% of your parasympathetic outflow, goes to neck, all those abdominal organs. He can also branch and intermingle with fibers of the sympathetic division. So he may be in the same bundle that's carrying some of that sympathetic information out to those organs. But they don't start at the thoracic. They come down from vagus and they may jump in those bundles. Preganglionic, we're going to remember starts up to high or down low. Down low in the sacral part, we can create the pelvic nerves. What are these going to do? Kidneys, urinary bladder, large intestines, sex organs. Pretty self-explanatory if you just know where they're located. There's all of these guys. And then these sacral ones are going to go down, talk to uterus, reproductive organs, urinary system, kidneys. All right, major effects of parasympathetic. We know, right? They're going to decrease heart rate, decrease respiration rate, undilate the eyes. It's probably going to constrict our blood vessels a little bit. Talk to those smooth muscles there. It's going to ramp these guys up. It's going to decrease these, ramp these guys up. Let's see, did we miss anything? Nope, I think we hit them all. Oops. Okay, all parasympathetic neurons release acetylcholine. And then our postsynaptic cell can really vary from different neurotransmitters. So for the most part, on our sympathetic, we are going to say acetylcholine, norepinephrine, right? This was sympathetic. There was a few exceptions. What were the few exceptions? Some of them could do nitrous oxide, right? Acetylcholine. But really, this is the bulk of our sympathetic neurotransmitters. The first one always does acetylcholine. The second one does norepinephrine. Then we get into these guys, and we're going to see acetylcholine. You guys know this guy, right? Acetylcholine esterase. Where do we see that? Remember that? My class better know that. Yeah, so when acetylcholine came into the synapse point of the neurons or at the neuromuscular junction, this was the enzyme that broke it down. And so we're going to see that. And then we said we had a big variety of receptors, right, on the postganglionic side. We have some that are nicotinic. What's that sound like? Nicotine. Nicotine affects nicotinic receptors. What does nicotine do for an effect to you? Excitatory or inhibitory? It's excitatory. Nicotine kind of ramps you up. So that is how nicotine got its name, is it affects the nicotinic receptors and kind of excites stuff. So you can see it does excitation of ganglionic neurons. Did you guys ever see that movie, Thanks for Smoking? It's got Aaron, who's the blonde actor? Aaron. Yes, he's in it, and has to go around and he's does this whole campaign on non-smoking and smoking, and they kidnap him and they put all these nicotine patches on him, and he has like a nicotine overload and almost dies and stuff. It's kind of a funny movie, but when you see what happens to him when he gets all those nicotine patches, I mean, it can be deadly. Why? Because it affects those nicotinic receptors to the degree that it can really affect you. Muscarinic, wherever you guys have probably heard this at some point, right? High school health class, maybe. It's like those shrooms that you can eat, the psychedelic shrooms and stuff, and they have a very inhibitory effect to you. So we have muscarinic receptors, and these can be excitatory or inhibitory. I will tell you they tend to most of the time be inhibitory. So we see those in those, like I said, the psychedelic mushrooms that people will sometimes, I don't know if people do it that much anymore. Do you guys ever hear about it? I don't really hear about it. Yeah. So, but this targets the parasympathetic system. So if you had an overabundance of attacking those muscarinic receptors, it could depress your system to the point, like your heart rate, because that's getting shut down by the parasympathetic system to the point where it could cause you to die because it shuts your heart rate down so much. So those are two of your receptors, nicotinic, muscarinic. We said we have acetylcholine, norepinephrine. Did I just jump? No, it seems like we're repeating, doesn't it? And then in our, as we said, in parasympathetic, we're going to have a variety of receptors. All right. In our parasympathetic system, we're going to see, again, those cranial nerves that we see. We are going to have 1/5 of divergence on the sympathetic division. What does that mean? Our parasympathetic nerves can talk to the same stuff that goes to our sympathetic system. So I really like this picture. I think this is a great study tool. I definitely put a little star by this and go back and study it. This shows a nice difference between our sympathetic and our parasympathetic. And if you look over here at the key, we have acetylcholine. So when we have these black arrows in here, that's indicating that acetylcholine is that neurotransmitter. Norepinephrine is going to be our green. Epinephrine is going to be our red. So these are preganglionic neurons. This would be coming from the central nervous system, from the brain area. They're going to come down. They're going to go to our sympathetic ganglia. On this side, we're going to see acetylcholine is our first neurotransmitter. It's going to synapse. In these ganglia, remember, they're clusters of cell bodies, so I can talk to a whole bunch of stuff at once. So this particular one has a synapse that's going to the bloodstream, and we're seeing norepinephrine, epinephrine. And this one over here, we see acetylcholine, and it's going down to cells in the body, whatever these target cells are. These ones are norepinephrine. For the most part, sympathetic is acetylcholine, norepinephrine. Okay, on our parasympathetic side, and remember, just to backtrack, we have a short preganglionic, long postganglionic on our sympathetic side. We get to our parasympathetic side. With this really long preganglionic, we are going to synapse on our parasympathetic ganglia, which is going to be close to or in our target cells. And we are going to see acetylcholine. So this is going to be acetylcholine, acetylcholine, and then we have varied receptors. And we can have those nicotinic, muscarinic, all those different types of receptors. All right, dual innervation. I talked about this before. That means that I can have an area in my body that both parasympathetic and sympathetic stuff is talking to at the same time. Why? Because it may be a body part that is often more talked to by the sympathetic side, for example, or the parasympathetic side. And when we have some kind of a response, we need to go tell it to do the opposite thing. So we may excite it through the sympathetic system, inhibit it through the parasympathetic, or vice versa. Does that make sense? That was a whole lot of words. But basically, we can have nerves going in that are normal to keep it running normally. And if we need to adjust it for one of these responses, we can ramp one up and turn one down. A good example of that is muscle tone. If we applied it to muscle tone, which would not be an autonomic thing, but it's easier to understand. When I'm standing here in postural muscle, I'm giving some signals to the muscles on the back of my leg and some signals to the muscles on the front of my leg, right? But if I was going to take off and do some sort of movement, I have to tell you contract, you relax. It's the same kind of thing when we're talking to the autonomic system. We may have to tell something to do an excitatory thing, something to do an inhibitory thing. And again, the two divisions most of the time have opposing effects to each other. Parasympathetic is going to travel through cranial nerves to close body, right? We saw that in the picture. Stuff that's down low is going to travel through the sacral nerves. We have autonomic plexuses. What's a plexus? You know? You may not know, because did we talk about them in the, oh yeah, we did talk about them in the last chapter. They're bundles of nerves that kind of come off into an area. So we had a cervical plexus, we had a brachial plexus, where we had a whole lot of nerves coming off our spinal cord, and they kind of make a bundle going out to the arm. So anytime we see the term plexus, that's what we're talking about, is a big grouping of neurons. So we have big neural networks going through the thoracic and abdominal, and we saw some of those. We saw superior mesenteric, right? There's a plexus. All right, here's some of the areas that have dual innervation: the heart, the respiration. So we have a cardiac plexus, pulmonary plexus, esophageal plexus, so going to our esophagus, celiac plexus. Where is this going to be going to? Think of celiac disease. Digestive, mostly stomach, but yeah, digestive system. Inferior mesenteric plexus, where's it going? Yep, lower part of these guys, right? And hypogastric, which is below gastric, is the stomach area, so it's down, it's going to be urinary system, areas like that. All right, cardiac and pulmonary. These guys have both sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers that are going to be talking to the lungs and the heart. Esophageal is going to go talk to basically esophagus, throat area, some of the probably upper areas of the stomach digestive system. At that point, we're going to get into the celiac plexus. We said it goes to upper digestive, like stomach. And inferior mesenteric, which is going to be the lower digestive stuff. Hypogastric is going to get clear down into that area of the body. This is how complex it looks in real life. There's our chain ganglion. This has both it has our sympathetic and parasympathetic displayed to some extent, where we have dual innervation. So you can see like the sympathetic chains going up here and some of our parasympathetic chains. Super complex. Tone, what is tone? Like, what is muscle tone? If we say, oh, he has a lot of muscle tone, what are we talking about? I mean, they look like they're flexing, right? But what is it when we talk physiology? It's where you have a constant signals with slight contractions to your muscles. That's what tone is. So we are sending signals, constant signals in. So anytime we talk about tone, that's what we're saying. We have something that we're consistently sending signals to keep it active, or to keep it, like in the case of skeletal muscles, the more you lift, the more muscles you have. So when you're standing there in posture, we're sending signals to those muscles with some slight contraction just to hold posture. That is tone. Same thing when we look at internal organs. We have some organs that we're going to have a constant tone to. Blood vessels have kind of a constant constricted state. And then if we go parasympathetic, we're going to open those blood vessels up. That would be an example. Okay, heart gets dual innervation. Basically, that's the big thing you need to know. If we have parasympathetic, we have acetylcholine, and it's going to slow the heart rate, right? Because that's what parasympathetic does, is slow our heart rate. If we have norepinephrine released through the sympathetic system, what's going to happen to our heart rate? It's going to go up. We have small amounts of both that are released all the time. We would just ramp one up more and tone the other one down. Parasympathetic gets to own the heart during most of the time. If we have a crisis, sympathetic system is going to take over. I already mentioned blood vessel diameter, the size of your blood vessels. If norepinephrine gets released, it's going to actually relax those muscles. Why? So we can open it. What does the parasympathetic? It's going to keep it a little more dilated. So norepinephrine is going to get decreased through sympathetic, which is going to open up those blood vessels. Okay, reflexes. We all love reflexes, right? So the interesting thing about visceral reflexes is some reflexes, when we're looking at somatic reflexes, they all reflexed into the central nervous system and went back to the effector, right? And we said central nervous system could be, it just reflexes to the spinal cord and then goes back out to the effector. Well, in our autonomic nervous system, sometimes it won't reflex to the spinal. It doesn't go to the central nervous system at all. What it will do is it will reflex to a ganglia and then go back out to an effector. So it never comes in for processing through the central nervous system. So we'll look at a couple of these. We have visceral reflexes. These take place in the viscera. What's our viscera? It's kind of internal, right? It's going to be internal organs. We have a receptor, a sensory neuron. So our receptor, some sort of a sensory receptor, it's going to send it in on a sensory neuron, and it's going to be processed, and then we're going to have a visceral motor neuron. Long reflexes are polysynaptic. What does that mean? Lots of synapses, right? So we're going to see information coming into the central nervous system. We're going to process it and send it back out. So let's look at some pictures of those here in just a second. Short reflexes are the ones I was talking about. They bypass the central nervous system. Where are they going to synapse and go back? Out of ganglia. They don't come into the spinal cord at all. So here we go. Here is our stimulus, whatever it is. It's some kind of a visceral sensory thing. On our long reflex, it comes in the dorsal horns. Why? Because it's sensory, right? It's going to synapse in the visceral sensory portion. We have our interneuron, which basically processes and sends that signal out here to the motor area. It's going to come out to the ganglia, where we'll see a synapse at the ganglia, and we'll get a response here. In a short reflex, we're going to skip the spinal cord part. This is going to make a much faster response. Here comes our signal in, and it just goes to the ganglia. We have a little neuron that then sends it out to the motor, and we get some sort of a reflex. When we see these kind of short reflexes, oftentimes we'll see them where tissues are kind of coordinating and talking to themselves. Like digestive system is a great area. We see a lot of short reflexes because as food arrives, it'll just signal itself, hey, we need more of this, or hey, we need to move that. So it kind of gets this nice coordinated action going within the stomach. So that's where we might see a short reflex. And again, this is just controlling activity in a small part or an organ. Okay, long reflexes regulate visceral activities in most of your organs. Short ones do, especially digestive system. They're just talking to glands, like glands that are going to secrete enzymes and things like that right there at the digestive system. So it really doesn't need to go tell the spinal cord and the brain what's going on. It's just kind of taking care of business using short reflexes. This kind of neural signal or nervous system is called the enteric nervous system. So the digestive system almost has its own little neural short reflex nervous system that is called the enteric nervous system. So it is coordinating all those nervous signals to itself without having to go get the brain's input on it necessarily. Okay, higher levels of autonomic control, things that take a little more higher brain order functions, things like salivation, swallowing, our digestive secretions, peristalsis, urinary function. These guys are regulated by the hypothalamus. All right, this is a super complex thing, but it kind of gives you, if you want to take the time, I'm not going to look through it in a bunch of time with you, but basically what you're going to see is down here we have some sort of a sensory receptor. It can do a short reflex, right, if it's a visceral thing. It can do a long reflex and do a visceral effector. It can come up and get processed by the brain through the hypothalamus, and we can see various responses. It depends on what the signal is. When we look at our somatic sensory system, it's going to come up, it's going to get processed, and then we're going to send that signal down. So it's just kind of a comparison between our autonomic actions versus our somatic actions. So our higher order functions share three things. You should know these. They require the cerebral cortex. They do both conscious and unconscious information processing, and they can adjust over time. And one of the things that we're going to see on this is like memory processing, things like that. Is everybody good? All right, memories. This would be one of those higher order functions. Does everybody good? Did I go too fast? Are you guys okay? Okay, so memory. We have fact memory, we have skill memory, we have short-term memory, we have long memory. And we're kind of looking at how each of these are processed. First of all, what is fact memory? It's where you remember little bits of information, store it away. Skill memory, this is things like you work on shooting a basketball and you learn those skills. Riding a bike, once you learn how to ride a bike, you can pretty much always go ride a bike. So these are kind of some of those learned motor behaviors. We kind of become unconscious about them when we've repeated them enough to store away the motor capability of doing those. We see the brainstem is going to store a lot of these. Who else participates in kind of those learned motor things? What part of the brain? Cerebellum, right? That was one of them. All right, short-term memories. This is information that can be recalled immediately. They don't last very long. Can we take short-term memory and convert it into long-term memory? Yes, we can. How do we do it? We have to do it over. A lot of repetition really is what does it. Once we do enough repetition, we can consolidate that memory and we can turn it into a long-term memory. And one of the things that they've shown that does it is if we keep sending synapses down the same neuron, so you're working on the same material, the same memory, it'll send synapses. The more you send those synaptic signals, it can actually increase the neurotransmitter output to the postganglionic neurons. And by doing that, that's how we begin to convert those memories over. So active neural transmission is what helps to turn those short-term memories into long-term memories. For long-term memories, we have two types. We have secondary memories. These kind of fade with long amounts of time. Tertiary memories don't fade at all. Is everybody good? Oh, this is stuff you'd remember forever, probably something like your birthday. It's just a memory that's there that you don't have to sit there and, or, think to recall it. So it's the only example I can come up with. I don't know a single person who's ever forgot their birthday. Do you? Your mom? Oh, she does, except for her
Well, I
mom.
guess-
No. Yeah, that's coming up. That's just because as you get older, you try to forget it, right? But it still pops up there. Your name? A tertiary, yeah. Yeah, I think even when you look at oftentimes like Alzheimer's people, dementia type people, those are some of the things they just don't forget at all. Okay, so this is how it kind of works. So here comes our sensory input, whatever it is. It goes into a short-term memory. As we continue to repeat it over and over and kind of stimulate those neural signals, it will eventually consolidate and become a long-term memory. And we can have a secondary memory or tertiary memory. Cerebral cortex is your fact memory, cerebellar stuff more down in the cerebellar area is your kind of your skill, your muscle movement, like riding a bike. Short-term memory, if we don't repeat it enough, we can lose it. Why? Because we just kind of get neural fatigue. Shock can do it, interference with other stimuli. There's just not enough of a continual signal going down for that really to get locked in and remember it. Sometimes with long-term memories, we can get temporary loss or permanent loss. Some of this would be some of your secondary memories, maybe if you've forgotten about it for a really long amount of time because you haven't thought about it or used it, you might begin to fade a little. Also with injuries and things like that. So memories are involved in a couple areas of the brain. I would just be familiar. You don't have to know the details, but just kind of know the areas of the brain that participate in kind of doing memories, consolidating memories. The amygdaloid body, the hippocampus, the basal nuclei, and the cerebral cortex. These guys right here, if you remember back, we kind of looked at a picture. They were part of the limbic system. They kind of ran around the corpus callosum. We had a picture, they were kind of color coded. They're not an area that you can physically like see a division line very easily. Although they have mapped out a bunch of those gyrus and things that are involved. We didn't look at those in detail. If you really got into a deep study of the brain, you could probably figure it out. But for our purposes, it was just kind of that limbic system area around that corpus callosum. The amygdaloid body and the hippocampus, like I said, does part of the limbic system. Limbic system, if you remember, does some of your emotions and things like that. You really need the limbic system for consolidating those memories. If you get damage to your hippocampus, then you're not going to be able to convert your short-term memories into long-term memories. This is like, what's the one that had, Adam Sandler, where she could never remember. What was it?
51st Dates.
Yeah, 51st Dates, that was it. And it's right on the tip of my tongue. What was the girl's name? Drew Barrymore, thank you. See, yeah, need to practice that more. But anyway, this would be kind of that. She just couldn't convert those short-term memories into long-term memories. Your basal nuclei, it's basically your cerebral nuclei. It's near the diencephalon, so it's kind of at the top of that brainstem area. It helps with the memory storage and recall. So if you had some kind of a damage to your brainstem, it's definitely going to affect that memory. And again, these guys are going to have some effect with emotions. And then your cerebral cortex, that was one of your practical ones. Did you guys all get it? Awesome. This is going to store most of your long-term memories. If it is like a sensory memory, it goes to the association areas. You guys remember what those are? Temporal lobe does hearing, frontal does higher order thinking. Occipital does vision. So those are association areas. Those are areas on the cerebral cortex where we know a certain amount of information goes to that area. And this kind of stores those, like voice. You hear the sound of a voice, you pick up the phone, you're like, oh, hey, mom, you know instantly it's your mother or your father or whatever, because you store away those voice memories. Or smell's another one. They don't even have that on here. Isn't that interesting? Your smell is really associated with the memories as well. At least I think it is. It is, actually. All right, cerebral cortex, you have your visual, auditory, speech, frontal lobes. If you damage any of those areas, obviously it's going to affect those memories. This is what I was kind of talking about, the more increased neurotransmitter release. So we send a signal down, we keep releasing neurotransmitters. The more we do that, you can actually increase receptors on the postsynaptic neuron, which is going to facilitate remembering things better. So the more you sit there and study your vocabulary list, the more you're sending neurotransmitters, and eventually you will get more receptors, and now it's going to help to turn that into long-term memory. So frequently active synapses increase the amount of neurotransmitter, which is going to ramp up memory. And I kind of talked about this. You guys all good with that? That's a big thing you need to know. So communication, when we send a signal down a certain pathway, we can map those pathways, and the more we've used those pathways, the more we develop those pathways, which helps with that memory storage. All right, drugs. What drugs can affect memory? Caffeine, nicotine, these are both excitatory. They attach to those receptors. Well, nicotine does the nicotinic. Caffeine is also an excitatory one, and it can actually enhance memory. So people who pull all-nighters oftentimes make pots of coffee, right? And that it actually does help. The hippocampus has a link, they call it this NMDA receptors. If you block those NMDA ones, it can actually inhibit long-term memory. And consciousness, I think I already kind of talked about this before, where we can go to sleep. When we go to sleep, we kind of shut our cerebral cortex down to a minimum. We don't shut it all the way down, but we shut it down to a minimum. And do you remember what send the signal up to kind of wake it up? Yeah, the reticular formation. So that's kind of gives you your degrees of consciousness, unconsciousness, and that goes up. You don't have to know all the waves or anything. Just know deep sleep, we're going to kind of shut that cerebral cortex down. We're going to decrease heart rate, respiration rate. Rapid eye movement, this is where dreaming occurs. Sleep is a constant mix between REM and deep sleep. REM, you don't have to know, this is kind of interesting though. It lasts about 5 minutes, and then you just go back and forth. You do not have to know any of these, but this shows your brain waves. Look how cute this little dog is. Okay, arousal, or when you wake up, we have, again, this little system of neurons that kind of travels up and wakes the cerebral cortex. It's called the reticular activating system. It goes through the nuclei. Do you remember what the thalamic nuclei and all those guys were? The thalamic nuclei is where we routed stuff to sensory, like somatic sensory, somatic motor, all those different things. And now we're going to become conscious of what's going on. The reticular activating systems activated with norepinephrine, which maintains awake. So you're going to stay awake and you're going to stay alert, because we're going to keep sending that norepinephrine to the reticular activating system. If we do serotonin to the reticular activating system, we're going to kind of shut it down and decrease the activity of it. Who secretes this? Melatonin, serotonin. Yes, the pineal gland. Okay, so this shows our reticular activating system. It goes up here and boom, it wakes that whole cerebral cortex up. And it goes down these cranial nerves basically for hearing and vision. So we become very alert and awake. Okay, a couple diseases. Huntington's disease, it's basically the destruction of acetylcholine secreting, and basically you have difficulty controlling movements. Your intellectual abilities gradually decline. That's what you should know about Huntington's, is basically this is what happens when you get Huntington's. You have difficulty with movements and your intellectual abilities decline. Serotonin affects sensory interpretation and emotional states. Some of your antidepressants affect the serotonin uptake or the levels of that. Dopamine, this can cause motor problems or Parkinson's when you don't have enough dopamine. And with Parkinson's, you definitely see motor delays. And it's not like mentally they don't know what they're supposed to do. They just can't talk to their muscles to do it. So oftentimes with Parkinson's, like my brother-in-law has Parkinson's, and when he was really bad, before they figured out what it was, he couldn't even pick his feet up anymore. He like walked like this. He could not even lift his feet. Now they have him on dopamine and all kinds of medicine, and he can walk pretty good, but he makes, like we were playing cards, he was just here for my daughter's graduation, and the whole time he's making all these muscle facial movements that he just has no control and is not even really aware, but he makes a lot of, so you get a lot of lack of muscle movement or excessive muscle movement in some areas. What happens when we get old? 30 is the magic number, right? After 30, hormones begin to decline. As hormones decline, we begin to see declines in every system in our body. 85% of the people over 65 have changes in mental performance. They can't remember names. They can't remember the names of actresses, although I'm not over 65, but I'm already there. Anatomical, we see decrease in the size of the brain, the weight of the brain, basically your cerebral cortex. We had a brain down here. We sent it back because it was pretty worn out, but it was from a dementia / Alzheimer's person. And the gyrus had gotten really narrow and small, and the sulci were huge. Like they were physically missing a lot of material from their cerebral cortex. So you will actually see physical changes. And remember that gyrus is its surface area, it's neurons firing and giving your information. So as we lose those areas, we're going to definitely see a decline. So people can't remember and things like that. That's interesting. I don't know. I never paid attention to that before. But they do say, that's why they tell you to do puzzles and all those things, because your synapses are firing. And as you consistently fire synapses, we're increasing action and receptors on our post. So I would assume if they had really high functioning thought type stuff that they would remember. Although I don't know, my dad's a veterinarian. He's in his 80s now. And medicine, as far as like he went through all that medical school and everything, he's quite intelligent, but he is starting to get some dementia stuff. And it's really interesting because he will give you something like one day, I really love antiques. And one day when I was down there, he gave me a jug, like an old antique crock type of jug. And then one day he was at my house and he's like, I love that crock jug. He's like, I have one just like that. I should give it to you. And I'm like, that is yours. You gave it to me. And so he'll forget stuff like that. But if you ask him anything about veterinary medicine, drugs, treatments, I mean, he can just all day long pull that stuff out. It's almost like they're tertiary memories for him. But some of the simple stuff in his life, he can't remember directions on how to drive a place he's been 100 times, so he'll plug it in, but it's just interesting. But he's definitely starting to get some of that. So he had a very cerebral job for a lot of years, and he remembers that stuff, but the simple, silly stuff he does not. We can also get decreased blood flow, which will affect obviously our brain tissue, which we can't regenerate. So we see fat, we can see arteries either get constricted or blocked, or sometimes we'll blow them out in the case of strokes and things like that. A stroke is just a disruption to blood flow. So a stroke can be from a blockage, or a stroke can be we damaged a vessel and blew it out basically. If we get intercellular deposit, I don't think I had anything too much on that. Neurofibrillary tangles, you'll sometimes hear about this, and it's the fibrils basically from your neurons, and they almost, I mean, they tangle up. They get in these mats where stuff isn't really firing through them very much. They just become a mass basically of tissue. Plaques, these can kind of surround and affect the transmission of neurons. And then anatomical changes lead to functional changes. And we just kind of talked about that. We talked about memories are a big one. Hearing, balance, vision, smell, and taste. Reaction times are slower. Reflexes are weaker and disappear. We don't have the motor control. And oftentimes this can be even gross motor more than fine motor type things, although you'll see both. But they'll have trouble with walking, but they can still thread a needle or sign their name. Okay, 85% of people, elderly people, are going to have some sort of age-related change. Some get senile, dementia, memory loss, amnesia, or emotional disturbances. Alzheimer's disease really is kind of a combination of dementia where you forget stuff, but it also tends to really affect emotions as well. Oftentimes, Alzheimer's people can swing from times of like anger and frustration, and they'll lash out and be kind of angry and mean, but it's not really their fault. It is a actual physical thing that creates it. Okay, and this just shows all the systems that are connected to the nervous system that we've looked at so far with 201 and 202. Yay, that's the autonomic. Any questions? Do you guys feel okay with it? I don't think, once you kind of get the gist of the nervous system, they all begin to kind of flow. I think anyway. Do you guys feel that way?